Hello, friends. Have you ever wondered how to win a chess game when all your pieces are under attack and none of them are defending each other? Let's take a look at this position. We are playing white. Our pawn is just 2 steps away from promotion, but there is a problem. Our knight is attacked by the black king, and our bishop is attacked by the black rook. If the pawn rushes to promotion right now, for example, with pawn to b7, the black rook will immediately chase it down, capture it, and our chances of winning disappear. Why? Because the rook will always find a way to sacrifice itself for either the knight or the bishop, leading to a drawn position. So what should we do? Try to find the solution on your own. Pause the video if you need time. If not, let's look together at a very interesting concept called domination. What is domination in chess? It is a situation where one or two pieces control so many key squares that they completely restrict the opponent's pieces, not just by direct attacks, but also through tactical threats. The strongest move here is knight to e3. Yes, it attacks the rook, but more importantly, it fights for control over the b-file. What should black do in this position? They have to decide whether to capture the knight or play something else. Capturing the knight seems the most natural choice. But before we look at that main line, let us first see what happens if the rook captures the bishop instead, still hoping to chase down the white pawn and capture it later. If the rook takes the bishop, then the knight jumps to d5, and suddenly not all the b-file squares are available to the black rook anymore. The rook cannot go to b4, that square is controlled by the knight. It cannot reach b3 in 2 moves either, because it would run into a fork on the way. That is exactly what we mean by domination. We are not just controlling squares directly, but also controlling them by tactical threats like forks. If the rook tries to reach the b-file by swinging over with rook to h1, white continues pawn to b7, then rook to b1, and knight to c3, another fork. The knight even dominates the b1 square. Naturally, after a move like king to d3, white captures the rook, promotes the pawn to a queen, and wins. So in the original position, the bishop is actually untouchable. But what if the rook immediately rushes forward and tries to catch the white pawn? In that case, the white knight jumps to d5, protecting the pawn and attacking the rook. And after, for example, rook to b3, white plays bishop to e7. What is the idea behind this move? The idea is to block the b4 square. That means either the white knight or the white bishop will soon occupy b4, and the pawn will then run all the way to promotion. And let me remind you, the move rook to b5, attacking the knight, is also unavailable for black because of the same fork tactic. That's exactly what domination is about. Now let's look at another attempt by black to sacrifice their rook for the pawn before we move on to the main line with king to e3. Suppose the rook goes to d4. What's the idea here? The idea is, first, to take advantage of a possible hasty move pawn to b7, where the rook can immediately capture the pawn. And if white doesn't play b7, then the rook hopes to reach d7 and attack the pawn from a different square along the b-file, one that supposedly isn't controlled by the clever coordination of the white knight and bishop. But what happens then? White plays bishop to e7. The rook goes to d7, and although it looks like both sides have achieved their goals, white has defended, and black has attacked, in reality, black can only give up the rook for the pawn. And when that happens, white still has the knight and bishop, which, as we know, can deliver checkmate to a lone king. So simply giving up the rook for the pawn doesn't solve anything for black. Instead, white can play knight to d4 with check, then knight to c6 attacking again, completely trapping the black rook. After any move from black, white can win through a fork or direct attack. The rook is trapped, it gets captured, and the remaining bishop and knight easily finish off the lone black king. The pawn on h7 can always be captured later. And now that we've reviewed almost all the possibilities for black, let's ask ourselves, what about the most obvious one? King to e3, simply capturing the knight. What kind of domination can white demonstrate here? A very precise one, bishop to e7. This move simply prevents the rook from reaching b4. But it turns out the rook can't reach any other squares along the b-file to stop the pawn either. If the rook goes to g2, the bishop blocks access to b2, and the pawn advances further. And if the rook tries to go to g1, hoping to reach b1 and attack the pawn, it turns out that because black captured the knight earlier, their king and rook now stand on the same diagonal. After bishop to c5, followed by bishop to g1, it becomes clear that the white pawn will promote without any resistance.